CHAPTER II of The Blind Brother by Homer Greene. This recording is in the public domain. Reading by Donald Cummings, Monroe, Connecticut. CHAPTER II THE BURN BREAKER. For a long time Bennie lay there, pitifully weeping. Then, away off somewhere in the mine, he heard a noise. He lifted his head. By degrees the noise grew louder. Then it sounded almost like footsteps. Suppose it were someone coming! Suppose it were Tom! The light of hope flashed up in Bennie's breast with the thought. But the sound ceased, the stillness settled down more profoundly than before, and about the boy's heart the fear and loneliness came creeping back. Was it possible that the noise was purely imaginary? Suddenly, tripping down the passages, bounding from the walls, echoing through the chambers, striking faintly, but oh, how sweetly, upon Bennie's ears, came the well-known call, "Bennie!" The sound died away in a faint succession of echoing e's. Bennie sprang to his feet with a cry. "Tom! Tom! Tom! Here I am!" Before the echoes of his voice came back to him they were broken by the sound of running feet, and down the winding galleries came Tom, as fast as his lamp and his legs would take him, never stopping till he and Bennie were in one another's arms. "Bennie, it was my fault!" exclaimed Tom. "Patsy Donnelly told me you went out with Sandy McCulloch while I was up at the stables, and I went way home, and Mommie said you hadn't been there, and I came back to find you, and I went up to your door and you wasn't there, and I called and called and couldn't hear no answer, and then I thought maybe you tried to come out alone, and got off in the cross headin' and got lost, and—" Tom stopped from sheer lack of breath, and Bennie sobbed out, I did get lost and scared, and oh, Tom, it was awful!" The thought of what he had experienced unnerved Bennie again, and still holding Tom's hand he sat down on the floor of the mine and wept aloud. "There, Bennie, don't cry," said Tom, soothingly. "Don't cry. You're found now. Come, jump up and le's go home. Mommie'll be half crazy." It was touching to see the motherly way in which this boy of 14 consoled and comforted his weaker brother, and helped him again to his feet. With his arms around the blind boy's waist, Tom led him down through the chambers, out into the south heading, and so to the foot of the slope. It was not a great distance. Bennie's progress had been so slow that, although he had, as he feared, wandered off by the cross heading into the southern part of the mine, he had not been able to get very far away. At the foot of the slope they stopped to rest, and Bennie told about the strange man who had talked with him at the doorway. Tom could give no explanation of the matter, except that the man must have been one of the strikers. The meaning of his strange conduct he could no more understand than could Bennie. It was a long way up the slope, and for more than half the distance it was very steep, like climbing up a ladder. Many times on the upward way the boys stopped to rest. Always, when he heard Bennie's breathing grow hard and laborious, Tom would complain of being himself tired, and they would turn about and sit for a few moments on a tie, facing down the slope. Out at last into the quiet autumn night, Bennie breathed a long sigh of relief when he felt the yielding soil under his feet and the fresh air in his face. Ah, could he but have seen the village lights below him, the glory of the sky, and the jewelry of stars above him, and the half-moon slipping up into the heavens from its hiding-place beyond the heights of Campbell's Ledge, he would, indeed, have known how sweet and beautiful the upper earth is, even with the veil of night across it, compared with the black recesses of the mine. It was fully a mile to the boys' home, but, with light hearts and willing feet, they soon left the distance behind them, and reached the low-roofed cottage, where the anxious mother waited in hope and fear for the coming of her children. "Here we are, Mommie!" shouted Tom, as he came round the corner and saw her standing on the doorstep in the moonlight watching. Out into the road she ran then, and gathered her two boys into her arms, kissed their grimy, coal-blackened faces, and listened to their oft-interrupted story, with smiles and with tears, as she led them to her house. But Tom stopped at the door and turned back. "I promised Sandy McCulloch," he said, "to go over and tell him if I found Bennie. He said he'd wait up for me, and go and help me hunt him up if I came back without him. It's only just over beyond the breaker, It won't take 20 minutes, and Sandy'll be expectin' me." And without waiting for more words the boy started off on a run. It was already past 10 o'clock, and he had not had a mouthful of supper, but that was nothing in consideration of the fact that Sandy had been good to him, and would have helped him, and was, even now, waiting for him. So with a light and grateful heart he hurried on. He passed beyond the little row of cottages, of which his mother's was one, over the hill by a footpath, and then along the mine car track to the breaker. Before him the great building loomed up, like some huge castle of old, cutting its outline sharply against the moon-illumined sky, and throwing a broad black shadow for hundreds of feet to the west. Through the shadow went Tom, around by the engine room, where the watchman's light was glimmering faintly through the grimy window, out again into the moonlight, up by a footpath to the summit of another hill, along by another row of darkened dwellings, to a cottage where a light was still burning, and there he stopped. The door opened before he reached it, and a man in shirt sleeves stepped out and hailed him. "Is that you, Tom? And did ye find Bennie?" "Yes, Sandy. I came to tell you we just got home. Found him down in the south chambers. He tried to come out alone, and got lost. So I'll not need you, Sandy, with the same thanks as if I did, and good night to you." "Good night till ye, Tom. I'm glad the lad's safe wi' the mither. Tom," as the boy turned away, "ye'll not be afeard to be goin' home alone?" Tom laughed. "Do I look scared, Sandy? Give yourself no fear for me. I'm afraid o' naught." Before Sandy turned in at his door Tom had disappeared below the brow of the hill. The loose gravel rolled under his feet as he hurried down, and once, near the bottom, he slipped and fell. As he rose, he was astonished to see the figure of a man steal carefully along in the shadow of the breaker, and disappear around the corner by the engine room. Tom went down cautiously into the shadow, and stopped for a moment in the track by the loading place to listen. He thought he heard a noise in there, something that sounded like the snapping of dry twigs. The next moment a man came out from under that portion of the breaker, with his head turned back over his shoulder, muttering as he advanced toward Tom. "There, Mike, that's the last job o' that kind I'll do for all the secret orders i' the warl'. They put it on to me because I've got no wife nor childer, nor ither body to cry their eyes oot, an' I get i' the prison for it. But I've had the hurt o' me touched the day, Mike, an' I canna do the like o' this again. It's the last time, mind ye, the last time Mike, or that's no Mike! Don't ye speak, lad, don't ye whisper, don't ye stir." The man stepped forward, a very giant in size, with a great beard floating on his breast, and laid his brawny hands on Tom's shoulders with a grip that made the lad wince. Tom did not stir. He was too much frightened for one thing, too much astonished for another. For, before the man had finished speaking, there appeared under the loading place in the breaker a little flickering light, and the light grew into a flame, and the flame curled around the coal black timbers, and sent up little red tongues to lick the cornice of the long, low roof. Tom was so astounded that he could not speak, even if he dared. But this giant was standing over him, gripping his shoulders in a painful clutch, and saying to him, in a voice of emphasis and determination, "Do ye see me, lad? Do ye hear me? Then I say to ye, tell a single soul what ye've seen here the night, and the life o' ye's not worth the dust o' the road. Whisper a single word o' it, and the Molly Maguires'll tak' terrible revenge o' ye. No, then to your home, rin, and gin ye turn your head or speak, ye shall wish ye'd a been i' the midst o' the fire instead." With a vigorous push he sent Tom from him at full speed down the track. But the boy had not gone far before the curiosity that overtook Lot's wife came upon him, and he turned and looked. He was just in time to see and hear the sleepy watchman open the door of the engine room, run out, give one startled look at the flames as they went creeping up the long slant of roof, and then make the still night echo with his cry of "Fire!" Before 20 minutes had passed, the surrounding hills were alive with people who had come to look upon the burning breaker. The spectacle was a grand one. For many minutes the fire played about in the lower part of the building, among the pockets and the screens, and dashed up against the base of the shaft tower like lapping waves. Then the small square windows, dotting the black surface of the breaker here and there up its 70 feet of height, began to redden and to glow with the mounting flames behind them. A column of white smoke broke from the topmost cornice, little red tongues went creeping up to the very pinnacle of the tower. And then, from the highest point of all, a great column of fire shot far up toward the onlooking stars, and the whole gigantic building was a single body of roaring, wavering flame. It burned rapidly and brilliantly, and soon after midnight there was but a mass of charred ruins covering the ground where the breaker once stood. There was little that could be saved: the cars in the loading place, the tools in the engine room, some loose lumber, and the household effects from a small dwelling house near by, that was all. But among the many men who helped to save this little, none labored with such energetic effort, such daring zeal, such superhuman strength, as the huge framed, big bearded man they called Jack Rennie. The strike had become general. The streets of the mining towns were filled with idle, loitering men and boys. The drinking saloons drove a brisk business, and the merchants feared disaster. Tom had not told any one as yet of his adventure at the breaker on the night of the fire. He knew that he ought to disclose his secret. Indeed, he felt a pressing duty upon him to do so in order that the crime might be duly punished. But the secret order of Molly Maguire's was a terror in the coal regions in those days. The torch, the pistol, and the knife were the instruments with which it carried out its desperate decrees, and Tom was absolutely afraid to whisper a word of what he knew, even to his mother or to Bennie. But one day the news went out that Jack Rennie had been arrested, charged with setting fire to the Valley breaker, and soon afterward a messenger came to the house of the Widow Taylor saying that Tom was wanted immediately in Wilkes-Barre at the office of Lawyer Pleadwell. Tom answered this summons gladly, as it might possibly afford a means by which he would be compelled to tell what he knew about the fire, with the least responsibility resting on him for the disclosure. But he resolved that, in no event, would he speak anything but the truth. After he was dressed and brushed to the satisfaction of his careful mother, Tom went with the messenger to the railroad station, and the fast train soon brought them into the city of Wilkes-Barre, the county town of Luzerne County. On one of the streets radiating from the courthouse square they stopped before a dingy-looking door, on which was fastened a sign reading, "James G. Pleadwell, Attorney at Law." Tom was taken, first, into the outer room of the law offices, where a man sat at a table writing, and 2 or 3 other men, evidently minors, were talking together in a corner. And then, after a few moments, the door into an inner apartment was opened, and he was called in there. This room was more completely furnished than the outer one. There was a carpet on the floor, and there were pictures on the walls. Also there were long shelves full of books, all bound alike in leather, all with red labels near the tops and black labels near the bottoms of their backs. At the farther side of the room sat a short, slim, beardless man, with pale face and restless eyes, whom Tom recognized as having been in the mine with the visiting strikers the day Bennie was lost. And by a round center table sat Lawyer Pleadwell, short and stout, with bristly mustache and a stubby nose on which rested a pair of gold-rimmed eyeglasses. As Tom entered the room the lawyer regarded him closely, and, waving his hand toward an easy chair, he said, "Be seated, my lad. Your name is let me see." "Thomas Taylor, sir," answered the boy. "Well, Tom, you saw the fire at Valley Breaker?" "Yes, sir," said Tom. "I guess I was the first one that saw it." "So I have heard," said the lawyer, slowly. Then, after a pause, "Tom, have you told to any one what you saw or whom you saw at the moment of the breaking out of that fire?" "I have not, sir," answered Tom, wondering how the lawyer knew he had seen any one. "Do you expect or desire to disclose your knowledge?" "I do," said Tom. "I ought to 'a' told before. I meant to 'a' told, but I didn't dare. I'd like to tell now." Tom was growing bold. He felt that he had kept the secret long enough, and that now it must out. Lawyer Pleadwell twirled his glasses thoughtfully for a few moments, then placed them deliberately on his nose, and turned straight to Tom. "Well, Tom," he said, "we may as well be plain with you. I represent Jack Rennie, who is charged with firing this breaker, and Mr. Carolan here is officially connected with the order of Molly Maguires, in pursuance of whose decree the deed is supposed to have been done. We have known for some time that a boy was present when the breaker was fired. Last night we learned that you were that boy. Now, what we want of you is simply this, to keep your knowledge to yourself. This will be to your own advantage as well as for the benefit of others. Will you do it?" To Tom the case had taken on a new aspect. Instead of being, as he had supposed, in communication with those who desired to punish the perpetrators of the crime, he found himself in the hands of the prisoner's friends. But his Scotch stubbornness came to the rescue, and he replied, "I can't do it, sir. It wasn't right to burn the breaker, and the man that done it ought to go to jail for it." Lawyer Pleadwell inserted a thumb into the armhole of his vest, and poised his glasses carefully in his free hand. He was preparing to argue the case with Tom. "Suppose," he said, "you were a miner, as you hope to be, as your father was before you, and a brutal and soulless corporation, having reduced your wages to the starvation point, while its vaults were gorged with money, should kick you, like a dog, out of their employ, when you humbly ask them for enough to keep body and soul together. Suppose you knew that the laws were made for the rich and against the poor, as they are, and that your only redress, and a speedy one, would be to spoil the property of your persecutors till they came to treat you like a human being, with rights to be respected, as they surely would, for they fear nothing so much as the torch. Would you think it right for a fellow workman to deliver you up to their vengeance and fury for having taught them such a lesson?" The lawyer placed his glasses on his nose and leaned forward eagerly towards Tom. The argument was not without its effect. Tom had long been led to believe that corporations were tyrannical monsters, but the boy's inherent sense of right and wrong was proof against even this specious plea. "All the same," he said, "I can't make out 'at it's right to burn a breaker. Why," he continued, "you might say the same thing if it 'ad been a murder." Pleadwell saw that he was on the wrong track with this clear headed boy. "Well," he said, settling back in his chair, "if peaceful persuasion will not avail, I trust you are prepared, in case of disclosure, to meet whatever the Molly Maguires have in store for you." "Yes," answered Tom boldly, "I am. I've been afraid of 'em, and that's what's kept me from tellin', but I won't be a coward any more. They can do what they're a mind to with me." The lawyer was in a quandary, and Carolan shot angry glances at Tom. Here was a lad who held Jack Rennie's fate in his hands, and whom neither fear nor persuasion could move. What was to be done? Pleadwell motioned to Carolan, and they rose and left the room together, while Tom sat, with tumultuously beating heart, but with constantly increasing resolution. The men were gone but a few moments, and came back with satisfied looks on their faces. "I have learned," said the lawyer, addressing Tom, in a voice laden with apparent sympathy, "that you have a younger brother who is blind. That is a sad affliction." "Yes, indeed it is," replied Tom; "yes, indeed." "I have learned, also, that there is a possibility of cure, if the eyes are subjected to proper and timely treatment." "Yes, that's what a doctor told us." "What a blessing it would be if sight could be restored to him! What a delight! What rejoicing there would be in your little household, would there not?" "Oh, indeed there would!" cried Tom. "Oh, indeed! It's what we're a thinkin' of al'ays. It's what I pray for every night, sir. We've been a tryin' to save money enough to do it, but it's slow a gettin' it. It's awful slow." How much?" Lawyer Pleadwell paused, and twirled his eye glasses thoughtfully. "How much would it cost, Tom?" "Only $100, sir. That's what the doctor said." Another pause. Then with great deliberation, "Tom, suppose my friend here should see fit to place in your hands, to day, the sum of $100, to be used in your brother's behalf. Could you return the favor by keeping to yourself the knowledge you possess concerning the origin of the fire at the breaker?" The hot blood surged up into Tom's face. His heart pounded like a hammer against his breast. His head was in a whirl. $100, and sight for Bennie! No lies to be told, only to keep quiet, and sight for Bennie! Would it be very wrong? But oh, to think of Bennie in the joy of seeing! The temptation was terrible. stronger, less affectionate natures than Tom's might well have yielded. CHAPTER III.